who may want to watch this after the program. MAC has a YouTube page, and it will be linked to our YouTube page after tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel members. And this program is meant to be kind of interactive, so feel free to add your thoughts in the chat, or if you wish to speak, just kind of, you can use the hand icon, and we can kind of create this dialogue with these very knowledgeable panelists that we have tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sonali Mahajan, who was born in India. She immigrated to the US. She's done a couple programs for MMAC in the past, so we love having her back. She completed her general psychiatry residency and fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at Emory University. And she's worked in various states around the country, and has worked in doing academics, public mental health, the court system, for-profit, non-for-profit. So she has a wealth of experience in clinical work to bring to the table. And she's also a Milburn mom. She has a daughter in elementary school. And sorry, still letting people in. I'd also like to introduce Lisa Sun, who is here with us today. She's a professor of psychology at Barnard College, and she conducts most of her research is focused on learning and metacognition, and I'll let her explain what that is. And she's also the mother of a middle schooler and elementary school student in town. Kate Smith is a mom. She has 4 kids who range in ages from 5 to 12, all here in Milburn. She has a PhD in education, and her research is focused on relationships between communities and schools, focused primarily on how parents can be involved in the curricular decisions when that's appropriate and not. And she is also a standardized test writer and academic tutor. And Kohav Dantara, he is a junior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North, which is a rigorous school located in Plainsboro, New Jersey. He is the current president of Letters to Strangers, Monroe and West Windsor, which is a youth-run organization that uses letter exchanges between students to help alleviate mental illness. He's also involved in student government and is active in advocating for better policies for students within his community. So we're very excited to have him join us and give us the student perspective. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Very excited to have you all here. Hope we can get a lot out of this discussion in the next hour. So let me start by asking each of you just to give me your initial thoughts on the film and how it resonated with you. Sonali, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I'll just share a couple of brief thoughts, and I think some of us may have similar thoughts about our impressions, but I think we can feel for these kids. We can understand the pressures that they experience, and I think some of us may have felt that ourselves as teenagers coming up in the systems here. But I think what is highlighted is that there is that outcome that we see sometimes where there is depression and anxiety, but I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, not just the stress from school. I think that's one of the pieces, and I can talk about that a little bit more later from my perspective. But I think that it's an important topic that we're bringing up because I think that kids are affected. Things have changed in the world today compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think we need to be aware of what's happened and the shifts that are happening and think about how we can shift the way we do things to help our kids feel more confident in themselves and feel like they've got good futures ahead of them.
Exactly. Kate, I see you. What were your initial impressions? I know this is a topic that you've thought about quite a bit.
Yes, mostly just as a parent. I mean, not really through research or anything, but it's been kind of hard to navigate what the rules are in terms of when you're supposed to give your kids a little bit more independence, when you're not. So the documentary really spoke to me in terms of, especially when they were sort of advocating for changes in legislation. I know every time it sort of occurs to me, well, maybe my kids should be doing this at this age. They seem to be ready for this. I'm kind of quickly on the computer trying to find out what the laws are, what you can sort of get in trouble for. And I do follow all of the free range parenting blogs, and a lot of those people are sort of in the documentary too. So I thought it touched on from the parents' perspective, but also sort of I really appreciated getting to see what the kids' responses were to the questions of, you know, what would you like to do, what do you feel that you are ready to do, and sort of, you know, getting their perspective on what they wish they were sort of a little bit more able to do.
Thanks. Lisa.
Yeah, I agree with both of what Kate and Sonali said. And I guess my reaction also was I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed watching the documentary. And the one thing that I just enjoy about these, which are very rare, I think, is the honesty. So yeah, I do work on metacognition, which includes actually different biases that we have. And one of the biases that I've been really interested in recently are kinds of symptoms that are similar or overlap with the imposter syndrome. And part of the imposter syndrome, part of why we might be anxious is because we're trying to be perfect in front of others. So even this kind of documentary coming out where people are honest and they're open about their anxieties, their struggles, their failures, I think that's already something that's so important in terms of helping people in the community and parents and kids. And so that was my general reaction. I really enjoyed it and thought it was very important.
Thanks. And Kohav, what's your take on the film, your initial impression?
When I first watched this, I ended up watching it 2 times, but the first time I kind of watched it, my initial reactions were how realistic it is to this, like the schooling system today. Coming from like a really rigorous district, I see pressures firsthand, especially with my colleagues, when they're trying to balance extracurricular activities and school. And just seeing that this is a common thing throughout a lot of individuals in our generation, especially when we're trying to like impress colleges and things like that. And, you know, being in my junior year of high school, where this is kind of like the last stretch before I kind of apply to college, I see these pressures really coincide together with the other pressures, including like social pressures and emotional pressures going on during this time. Because the truth is, you know, school is not the only thing that's going on in our lives, right? We're trying to maintain our friend groups and we're trying to really just kind of fit in because high school is still changing, especially coming out of the pandemic. So putting all that together really just puts a lot of pressure on as like students and high school students especially. And I'm kind of starting to see that these pressures are starting to trickle down to, you know, the middle school and even elementary school levels, where you see individuals who are in elementary school now actually worrying about their extracurriculars for high school and for college. So just seeing, you know, all of that kind of worries me a little bit, but I was really impressed with the documentary and with how realistic it is to my high school experience.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of the themes that the movie brings up is like, how do we define what is a good childhood? And how is that different from the child? Like, how are my kids, your kids, how is their childhood different from what we experienced 30, 40 years ago? And what's changed, and how, you know, what are the things we're trying to keep, and what are we trying to kind of improve upon? I don't know who would like to jump in on that one.
Well, I can talk about my childhood. I grew up right here in Chatham my entire life. And I was lucky. I grew up right on the road at an entrance to the Great Swamp. And watching the documentary, it made me think about my childhood and how much play I had, how much independence I had, how much freedom. and also how much my parents worried and how much I didn't know about their worrying. And of course, it was a different time, but that was, my entire childhood, it was just school, then Great Swamp. There weren't these other, activities where I thought I had to perform in a certain way, whether it's an academic thing or anything else cultural, right? It's music or sports, or, I didn't have this thing I did every single day or several times a week. So that was totally my childhood. And I liked how in the documentary, it was like, yeah, the time to go home was when the town bell rang, which was 7 p.m., right? There weren't even parents telling us, well, you have to be home. And we just knew, okay, that was dinner time. And so, it reminded me of that. And it made me a little sad because it is very different now. And it was Chatham. We're in kind of the same communities, the same suburbs here, but yet there is a very different culture. And so it did make me a little sad, but others can talk before we keep going.
Does anyone think that the pressures are coming, or the changes, I don't want to say pressures, but the changes are coming from, where are the changes coming from? How is it what we're experiencing influenced by?
I
Is
feel
it
like
the
there are a
school?
lot of I feel like there are a lot of factors kind of working together. I mean, technology, obviously that allows you to sort of have a different relationship with your child's free time. So you're sort of able to be in constant communication. You're able to know all of these things that people in the past really weren't able to do. You can know where they are, who they're with, what they're doing. So I think that has an impact, because I think if it's available, obviously most people are probably going to do that. I think inequality certainly comes into it a great deal, because there's much more of a sense of, your kids could sort of lose whatever position you feel that they should be able to keep in the world. And that sense of threat to that, I think, makes a real difference in how people sort of think of how the childhood years should be used. They should all be an investment into making sure that when your child grows up, they're going to be where you feel that they should end up. And I think, the documentary sort of touched on, the sort of kidnapping paranoia that came out in the 80s. It sort of seems to me that all of those sort of things work together as different vectors that kind of got us here.
I wonder if part of it is also that parents have been working so much harder. So many families now are two-income households compared to just one. And I think we got to look at cost of living and all of the changes that happen with childcare or sending to private school or taxes, whatever it might be. As costs go up, we feel as parents we have to do more. And I wonder if some of that trickles down onto the kids, right? And they have to do more. They have to have this high-paying job to be able to function and to maintain the lifestyle that they've grown up with, And as a kid, I'm thinking back to Lisa and her days. I was, like you, I wasn't involved in so many things after school. I got home from school and went down from one neighbor's house to another, running up and down the street, figuring out what we're going to do next and chasing each other. So I agree. I think times have changed, and I think that there are these changes happening because of natural things around us as well, and the pressure that maybe parents feel, and they're kind of drawing that down into the kids and trying to prepare them so they're not suffering. And
Sonali, I want to follow up with you on that, and this is another area that we've talked about, is parental anxiety, and how parents' anxieties can then be modeled for the kids and have an impact on the kids. How are you seeing that with the families that you work with the kids that you work with, and what tips do you have for how we can kind of, as parents, maybe overcome some of those anxieties or pressures that parents feel?
sure. Now, I definitely think that, as parents, we all have a natural sense of fear and worry. I think some of that is needed. Some of that is necessary to help us survive, right? There's these natural instincts that we have. I think it can get past that line where it is a little bit more than what is sort of required for the situation or the environment that we have to live in and deal with day to day. So when that happens, we might see that parents are a little bit more worried about how well their kid is doing. They might be checking the grades a little bit more often than the child might be. They might be, sending emails or multiple reminders to their kids, or emails to the teachers to try to figure out what's going on. So I think that's a little bit of how it plays out. And then also, when kids bring home a grade that isn't so good, I think that also makes parents get anxious, and they might share that in maybe not sharing the anxiety about it, but they might end up being angry or upset with the child for making a B instead of coming home with an A for that class, which they typically might do well in. But there's so many circumstances that go into a grade. So I think I do see that trickle over effect from parents' anxieties sort of being modeled and showing up in their kids. Kids pick up on so much of what we do and how we do it, and we are teaching them every moment of their lives, and we don't quite realize it. So I think for parents that do get this sense of anxiety or worry or fear for their child when it comes to school, for example, we might need to check ourselves and ask ourselves, what's the worst that could happen? What's the biggest fear that we have for them? And is that fear realistic? I mean, are we really worried that this kid is going to fail the class or fail the whole year because they bring home a couple of B's or a couple of C's or D's? What makes us want to check those grades? Why do we want to check for those missing assignments? Again, just reassessing what's important and what are the realistic steps that could follow, or consequences, if you will, that could follow this event that's happened. And I think as parents, we just want to take a step back and sort of reel in that anxiety a little bit and think about self-care. Do we need to, have someone for ourselves to talk to? Do we need to learn some breathing techniques or mindfulness techniques to help us cool down the level of worry that we have for our children? And I think we also need to reassure ourselves that our kids can bounce back. Our kids are allowed to fall down sometimes. We're not always going to be there to hold their hands and pick them right back up, and we're not going to be there when they go off to college, and we're not going to nudge their professor to give them extra time or nudge the child to email their professor for extra time. That's not going to happen. So it's now our time to sort of provide that gentle guidance, and it's their time to make the mistakes and to learn to rise up from them. So let's model the ways that we want our children to deal with things. Let's not get overly excited or overly upset about a grade that isn't so good or a project that didn't turn out as well as you would have wanted or think it could have been, because they're learning from us. So if we can reassure them that whatever grade, whatever mistake they might make, whether it's a grade or maybe it's a social interaction that didn't go so well, we still love them and they're still important to us, and we can work this out together, sort of thing. Let's figure it out. Let's have conversations about it and not be overly emotional in those situations. So
Sure. And now, Lisa, I know I want to bring you in because you teach college students, so you've had these interactions.
I definitely
with us.
I definitely still get parents contacting me, and that's the consequence of everything you were talking about, Sonali. And I wanted to add on to what you were saying, because in a sense, the documentary, was about how to reach independence, right? How to help, our children learn independence. And that could be outside the classroom, whether it's walking to school on your own, making friends, or fighting with friends and figuring out relationships. And, our kind of worst nightmare is, we get nervous because, well, if they go to school and what if they get hit by a car? That's kind of like something bad that could happen. So we're very nervous. In the same thing in the classroom, I think it's analogous. When you think of, okay, a B, maybe not a B, maybe an F, right? A kid getting an F is kind of like a car crash. It's kind of like, oh no, these are the big errors. And honestly, I don't think parents can handle it in this world. So we want to, I think, do things before the car crash, before the test day, before totally walking to school on their own. And so I try to think of this, and it comes out of cognitive psychology. It's not only allowing them to make errors and allowing them to bounce back, because if it's a big error like this, like a final exam, or if they got hit by a car or something bad happened, it's too late. We're not always resilient. So the key is to foster an environment of baby errors. And that means, okay, outside the classroom, the first time I walked to school, had my son walk to school, I'm not going to let him go alone, right? You say, okay, let's walk together. And then a few days later, you stand 2 feet behind him, and then you stand 10 feet behind, and you see if he's dilly-dallying, if he's going outside the crosswalk, the sidewalk. So you see and allow for small errors. And then you're accustomed to kind of knowing how to guide them. And they're also learning their limits. And it's the same in the classroom. You don't look at their test grade. If they say to you, I have a test next week, 7 days later, you say, tell me about what you're learning now. Or, hey, can you make a few questions to test yourself and then try taking your own exam? That's really the most beneficial way, not only to get accustomed to making failures or, being a failure in some way and making mistakes and bouncing back, but it's also the best way to actually not have the big failure at the end. So these are good learning. These are the metacognitive strategies, learning how to learn, not, what's your grade or what are you learning? It's how are you going to control your time? How are you going to control your study tonight? Are you going to self-test, or are you going to just passively read? This is what metacognition is. And I think it's the same for when a kid is learning independence, like the woman who let her kid, ride on the subway. I think the other thing I wanted to just mention is that we're all very different. So if there's a learning curve, it's, the kid, maybe he hasn't ridden the subway alone, but maybe he's had other kinds of things where he feels ready, but it's not someone else's, to judge, right? It's not like, oh, that mother's crazy. So, that's also part of the metacognitive bias or the illusion when we think there's one way, or there's, this is the age where everyone walks to school alone. It's not true. It's not true at all. And it's the same academically, right? I know parents will say to other parents, or say behind the back of other parents, like, oh, I can't believe they got them a French tutor. Like they're really putting pressure on the kid. Hey, maybe other kids had French speaking nannies, right? We're all at different parts of our experience of the learning curve, and that's what leads us to make our decisions for ourselves. So kind of I was thinking, okay, how would I say it to make it very simple, to kind of like a catchy, reminder, kind of like a eat this, not that. I was thinking, don't judge, but learn, right? You can ask, oh, you got a tutor? Why? Like, how is it going? Is there pressure? Right. I think it's kind of getting off of the, what's the right way, but learning about the very different ways that different parents and kids in the community are learning how to become independent. So that's what I was thinking of ever since watching this documentary and thinking about how cognitive psychology is connected to these issues.
That's very true. I know it's very easy you bring up judgment, and I'm sure we all, it's just something you can't avoid. You feel like your choices are being judged. You, in your head, are judging other people. That's just something humans do. So kind of being aware of that and mindful of it, I think, is a very helpful way to be more aware of the decisions and knowing how you're weighing risks of things and where you're striking the balance and when your kids are ready to take that next step. I know, Kate,
Yeah.
you mentioned before when we were talking about this, was it a line in the movie when kids can't do something, they can't do anything? What was that quote you pulled?
Oh, I think I was kind of taken by the kid who wanted to use a butter knife.
Yeah, and like,
And wasn't.
how do you judge when your kids are ready to do that next thing?
So I think I've been very lucky in that I would definitely be a little bit more judgmental maybe if I had fewer children. But I used to be much more judgmental when I had one and when I had zero, especially. But now that I have four, I can kind of see that they're all ready for things at very different times. And we obviously get into pretty frequent arguments like, well, why can so and so use that app, but I can't use that app? Like, well, because that sibling has demonstrated a lot of responsibility in how they use their apps, and that's why they're in a very different place than you're in right now. So I sort of let them give things a shot. And as someone said earlier, I mean, the consequences really, really do matter, as Lisa said. We were thinking about this when we were skiing recently because one of the younger ones really, really wanted to try the lift by herself. And she was sort of saying, yeah, but you let so-and-so try this, you let so-and-so try this. It's like, well, but this is a lift that's pretty high up in the air. And I mean, the consequences for this are not small. So no, I think on this one, we should probably err on the side of caution. But yeah, I mean, if the consequences are, I'm a big believer in what Lisa said and sort of letting kids fail for a while until they sort of figure out their own way and their own sort of techniques to do a little bit better. As long as, again, you're not on a ski lift or something equally consequential.
Kohav, do you feel like most of your peers have a good sense of knowing when they're ready for certain responsibilities, or do they feel like parents are too controlling of their actions?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it has to do with kind of like the maturity. I'd say like a maturity curve that happens when, you're in those adolescent ages. I'd say in middle school, if I was in like seventh or eighth grade, I would say that my peers would think that their parents are being a little bit too controlling, because they would think that they're ready for things that they're not necessarily ready for. And I might even say that for like my freshman and sophomore years, because there would always be like these extra responsibilities. Like some people would want to babysit and they would want to do like all these other things, and their parents would say no because, and like this also goes for like curfews and things like that. Like they would say no to those things. But by the time we get to like junior or senior year, like you're basically talking to young adults, and I feel like at this point, I'd say most of my colleagues that I see usually are able to make decisions for themselves. And occasionally you'll see that like a parent will put their foot down on a decision, but I'd say that the parent would probably put their foot down in a decision more so when they were, in younger ages, when they didn't exactly know what the responsibilities were of a mature adult.
Can I add also onto that? That's really interesting, Co-op. It's going back to that, what you just said and what Sonali, you were talking about before with the anxiety contagion. I think it's really difficult because we know in psychology that anxiety is contagious. There's a really great study, there's several great studies now that show that, in fact, even in the academic domain, for example, math or STEM anxiety, if a parent has math anxiety and they're trying to help their kid with math before age 5, it goes for the long term in the kid. And it's very interesting because ironically, parents who also have math anxiety, but it's so high that they don't do homework with the kid because they're so nervous, those kids are protected. It's kind of like, working with your kid with the anxiety, it's contagious. But as a parent, I've kind of had difficulty kind of navigating, because of course I have anxieties, different types of anxieties. I don't have math anxiety, but I have anxieties about sickness, health, getting hurt, all these kinds of normal things. And I've learned, for me personally, and that's why I think it's very individual and very family related. I think it's the most healthy where I open up honestly to my children, and I'll say, I trust your decision, but this makes me very nervous. And I'm so nervous and I'm so anxious. And, I just want you to know that. And it's so interesting because I think kids at a certain age, if they see your honest, open emotions, that actually, now you can avoid putting on an imposter mask. One of the things that I get very nervous about are when kids feel they have to hide some of their emotions or anxieties or imperfections from their parents. And that affects so many different things where we don't know if they're struggling with a school, a subject, or they're struggling with a relationship with a friend they had a falling out with, or, so one of the things that I take very seriously and prioritize is, it doesn't matter how imperfect I am. I will definitely just say it to my daughter. I will say, I'll say to her, if I have to give a presentation and I'm nervous, I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. And then eventually, now she's in middle school, she can say to me, I know, Mom, but it's okay. You'll get through it. So not only do you get the support, but she can learn. There are times that she will be nervous and anxious, like when she's doing a school presentation. But that's just part of the learning curve, and you can get to the end point eventually. And so I think that's so important, to make sure that we know what they're feeling, even if they don't tell us everything, that they have the confidence they could tell us and we would still love them, or we would try to help support them with whatever support they needed.
That was one point in the movie. One of the families that they followed was the young woman who, I don't know if this is imposter syndrome or not, but who felt a lot of pressure to, take the right classes, be in the AP courses, get into the right school, to the point where then she began alleviating some of her anxiety and stress with marijuana and other substances, to the point where she really had to go to rehab. And then I know Sonali and I talked about that too, about the movie kind of, there wasn't that communication between the parents. And I don't know how you viewed it. Was it that the parents didn't see it, that she didn't talk about it? What takeaways can we take from that story, from their experiences, to help our kids who may be in that cycle at school with trying to be perfect, trying to be successful? And how do we define success for our kids in a healthy way? I open that up to whoever wants to.
I'll just say something really quickly, because I've talked a lot now, but about that is that we, not even with any kind of bad intentions, we focus so much of our speech and energy and everything to positive successes. For example, we might speak in a way to our child like, you have all the potential in the world to succeed, right? You are so good at this. Maybe you can do it when you're older. Wow, this was a great project. Maybe you should major in this in college. Everything is about the success. That's the disguise. That's an imposter disguise, the last moment of the learning curve. So I have been for the past, I don't know how many years, telling but mostly in Korean, because I've done so much, I've written books in Korean, and I've just because they have their own issues with this, but this perfection mask. So I have been saying so many things about how to say, instead of you have the right to succeed, to say you have the right to make mistakes. You have the right to go slowly. You have the right to have detours. When a kid hears that, it's kind of, okay, I can try different things. And it's just, I think mentally the health is, they're saying, they can hear from their parents, okay, I have a right to kind of lose my way.
Mhm.
Then they could be honest, and there's no surprise, and some surprises might be really just terrible, like drugs or drinking or alcohol, or abusive relationships, bullying. And so, just to say you have the right to be imperfect, and also model it. I had imperfection,
That's the key.
and so yeah, that's what I'll say for that.
Sonali, let me have you jump in. How do we get kids to hear that message? Because a lot of times it's hard to have them hear that.
I think it is. I think that I have these conversations quite often with parents and kids to help parents be in a place where they can actually handle and tolerate what their kid wants to tell them. There's so much fear from the child's perspective sometimes about how their parents are going to react if they show them the F, or, and it's not like the full grade for the course, it's just an F on that assignment, maybe. Or, if they need to talk with somebody and they would like to be able to share it with the parents, but they don't know how the parents are going to react. Or in the past, when they shared something, the parents might have reacted in a really big way that made the kid feel even more uncomfortable and kind of gave them the experience that this is not an okay place for me to go and talk about this. So I think we have to get to a place where parents can be able to accept and just be with the child in that moment when they're sharing that anxiety, that frustration, that social situation that was disappointing to them, or when they got teased and how it felt. So to be able to be with them, not, we can share how we're feeling. I'm really sorry that you're going through this. I hate that this is happening. It's so unfair. What do you need from me? What can I do to help? Do you need any help? Can I just be here with you? Or how would you like for me to respond? Because I want to do the right thing, but I'm not sure what to say or do. And can you teach me what you need from me in those moments? So I think that we have to work at creating that connection to where it's a little bit more acceptable for the kid in their own eyes to be able to go to the parent once they've had those conversations. And even if it's just one parent, maybe it's not both parents. Some kids get overwhelmed with having to talk to both parents at the same time. If it's just one parent, that's okay. At least they are able to go to one, but then the two parents need to be on the same page. They have to be able to talk about what's going on and present that nurturing, that warm stance when the child is coming to them or the teenager is coming to them with this situation that happened. So I think we can work at getting to those places with our kids. It does take time, especially if we're not used to it and we haven't been able to do that before. The other thing that as parents, we do have strong emotions ourselves, right? That's not uncommon. And when we see our children hurting, we want to go out there and handle it sometimes. And we're not going to do that. We're going to take a step back. We're going to take a breath and we're going to say, okay, what does my child need in this moment? And what can I do? So we also don't want to show those big reactions in front of our kids, even though we feel it. Let's take that to the bedroom. Let's talk to the other parent or talk with our friend and show that big emotion, but at least share that, with the child, we are able to regulate our emotions, and another piece of modeling that happens. So I think that's an important place where we can have a better impact on our kids to show that regulation, and for them to be able to then hopefully come to us in the future when something like this happens, because we showed them we could handle it and we're willing to help them get through it. Now, we're not going to solve the problem, because that's not necessarily the right thing. We're going to teach them how to solve the problem, or maybe ask them to figure out what they need to solve the problem they're presenting with. So
We have a comment in the chat too that ties into this. How do you deal with differences in parenting styles between the parents, whether it's in, families, co-parenting families, families that have separate homes? Like, how do you deal with differences? Parents aren't on the same page.
Lisa, do you want to take that one, or
Yeah, so I think that, it's, I have a slightly personally different thing where I'm in charge of the parenting in my house. So, my husband, he just, yeah, you do it. And he also grew up in Korea, so he feels more kind of unaware of, what the kind of cultural norms are here in America. So I don't have as many of those experiences, but I just want to say that actually, and many parents might disagree, which, I understand both sides, because I sometimes disagree with myself. But one thing about going back to metacognition is that, of course, parents know their kids better than other parents, which you don't do the judgment. But kids know themselves better than the parents. And so I would actually, at this point, bring in the thoughts and opinions of the child. And we've done this with very big decisions. Where do you want to live? Is this house okay? What kinds of activities do you want to do? What, do you enjoy learning this? Do you want to spend time on this today? Or how many hours should you spend playing Roblox? How many hours should you sleep? These kinds of things where parents think they have to make all the decisions. But here again, I think the kid has to have some independence and make mistakes and realize, oh, I ate too much ice cream for dinner, so now I have a stomach ache. That's when they learn, and they're going to start controlling. That's what metacognition is controlling, what you think are your decisions. And I guess the most recent big decision for our family is for my kids, are you going to wear a mask or not? And this is, it's a very controversial kind of issue even now. But I'm a very stressed parent about illness. And so, of course, if I were to do what I wanted, everyone would be masked at all times. But I have tried to use my metacognition and understand that my kids also have their own thoughts about their thoughts and their learning and their safety and their mental health, I allow them to make their own decisions, whatever it is. And this happened last year when they had the decision to go to school or stay virtual. They made their decisions and they made different decisions. So as much as possible, bringing in the kids' thoughts and talking it with the kids is actually, I think, more important than the two adults for child decisions.
I agree with you, Lisa. And the best part of that is that it gives the child ownership of whatever the decision is.
Yes.
And it works very well when you do it that way. It
Yes.
really does.
I'll just add a little piece. So kind of related, Lisa, to what you were saying, we actually bring, when we need a consequence in place, we actually bring our daughter into the conversation, definitely to say, what do you think is the right sort of consequence that meets what the behavior was?
And sometimes they're stricter than you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we'll come to some kind of compromise in there. It's not always going to be what she exactly wants, but we'll try to work it in a little bit. We'll be a little flexible with that.
And I really think a lot of parents, and me included, have this illusion, for example, that if a child is done studying or done with their homework, a lot of parents will say, hey, don't you need to read it for 15 minutes more? Or don't you need to practice the piano for another 15 minutes? We actually don't know how much practice they need at that moment. And it's actually better to split practice sessions across longer periods of time. But we do this thing where we might say to a child, okay, study French for an hour, then do your math for an hour. And that's actually suppressing their metacognition, or they're learning to learn self-reflection processes. So, apparently in a lot of the literature, when kids are in 5th grade, they got it. They know how to learn. But if they were perfect up to that point because that they just did what the parents told them, they're not going to know by 5th grade. And that's when it starts getting more difficult for the parents, because we still have to monitor and control for their entire lives, because they don't have that learning to learn kind of development ready, because they never made mistakes. And so they never had to tweak and know how to tweak.
So if I can just respond a little bit to the question about, parents when they're not on the same page, I think it's a process. I don't think it's one conversation or 2 or 3 conversations. I think it's a process over time. And there might be some things that, you as parents agree on, that this is the sort of limit we're going to place on this, or I'm okay with these friends that they, want to go out with, or I'm okay with this sort of curfew. But when there are differences, I think there has to be that ongoing communication repeatedly, because it's not going to get fixed. And every situation can be a little different. It might be a little caveat that comes with the next time they ask you to go hang out with their friends and to take the car, right? And so I think those discussions have to happen as much as possible, and trying to contain our own emotions about it as adults, talk about it between adults, and then present that joint stance if you can come to some sort of conclusion together. If not, that's a little difficult. I don't know how to address the times when you can't come to a conclusion, but maybe this time this person compromises and agrees to let that be the decision, and the next time that person compromises and agrees for it to go that way. When there's a discussion or a disagreement. Kate, you have 4 children. Maybe you have more experience than I do with this sort of thing.
No, I was just going to say research is just sort of what we do. We're just kind of honest with the kids when we're on different pages about whatever they're asking about. I remember as a child, my parents would really struggle to present a unified front, and it was always really clear to me which one had won the argument about what their unified front was going to be, and that the other one really wasn't quite as unified, maybe. So it's always really important to me to sort of let the kids know that we're being honest with them. They're knocking on the door right now. But it's important to sort of let them know, look, this is us being real with you. I sort of feel this way about it. Your dad kind of feels this way. Reasonable people can completely disagree. What are your thoughts on that? And then, the 3 of us, whoever happens to be involved in the decision, will come to something. I know everyone sort of gives you the advice that you need to present a unified front all the time. It's just, to me, it's not very realistic if you have 2 adults in the household, or 2 adults who are in charge of the decision making for a kid. The idea that they'd always sort of come to the same conclusion just seems kind of unrealistic to me. So we don't try to pretend.
Yeah, so that's, it's anxiety provoking too. And going back to what you said, Kate, but also what you'd said, Sonali, about, staying calm, not making a huge kind of emotional explosion about things. I think this is one of the most difficult things also to balance, because sometimes I think if I am in the mood to explode, right? If something happens and I'm like, oh no, and which I can do because that's what I do. I have spent now several years trying to see how to stop that anxiety explosion, and that's something very difficult for me personally. I get really kind of panicked, right? And what I've found to be actually very helpful is, and this comes again out of cognitive psychology, is the notion of mental time travel. And it also connects with the notion of being always perfect parents and having hindsight bias as though we were born perfect. And so it's so simple. What I do is, if a kid is hurt or something happened, or they're stressed about something and they show it, or they had a fight, or they got a bad grade, or and I don't do this with bad grades, but if something is happening and I'm in like a little bit nervous, I just stop and I mentally time travel. So it's not about the kid right now. It's about, what did I do when this happened when I was 8, when I was 12, when I was 15? And what will happen is you see your entire learning curve with all your imperfections. And then it's, oh, yeah. And then you can be honest with your kid and say, sometimes this happened. In fact, it happened to mommy. And it took a long time. I didn't understand, calculus, or couldn't ride a bike for several, and this, once you mentally time travel for real without hindsight bias, and we're not talking about the kind of, it's not that, you kind of mistakenly think you were a genius from the beginning. The problem with hindsight bias is it's a very thin mask, and we know that in psychology. For example, when your kid is practicing the violin for a week and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, that's really bad, he's not cut out for the violin. That's actually not because you think you were a great violinist, but because you think you were better after 4 days rather than 7. It's a very thin mask. What we do with hindsight bias is we don't think it took, a week. We think it took 5 days. And then our impatience starts to grow and our anxieties. And then we think if a kid is in trouble, we think, oh, at first, that's never happened. This is terrible. There's something wrong with my kid, or I need to panic. But going back to your own regular life, your own true human life and your imperfections, it's, oh, yeah, my kid's actually doing better than me in terms of their own decisions. And so, this is, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but it's been for me with this mental time travel, it gets rid of hindsight bias. And I have way more patience than I ever had in my life. And so I'm never, impatient about some kind of mistake or imperfection with my kid, or when they take too long doing something.
Yeah. And I think we always think back on our own childhood as being a lot more idyllic than it probably was.
Yeah.
And that everything back then was better and easier than it is now. We just don't, we're not there to remember everything as it happened. And so, with the time we have left, and I certainly, invite everybody, if you would like to share with us and ask questions or give us your thoughts on the film and the issues that we've raised, please feel free to do that. I do, would love to get our panelists' thoughts just on, lessons that we've learned over these last 2 years from the pandemic, and having that extra time with our families, our kids, to see, where they are, how they're doing, and what are the things that are positives that we can take out of that time and those challenges, and really work towards making significant changes in how we're defining success, how we're dealing with anxiety, how we're managing our parenting as we move into this next stage.
So Santosh here, I wanted to bring something which I also see that, there's a lot of pressure on kids, anxiety, like you well said, because of the whole environment, peer pressure, parents pressure. One thing among all this pressure, I also see that somewhere the whole value system, simple things like being responsible, being honest, being, uh, that's just getting, hampered also, because they have just too much pressure, just too much pressure to perform. So raising kids who have good value system, along with the behavior that sort of they get influence from people around them, they're like challenges at multiple fronts. So it's a difficult problem, and some of the points that you shared, I wanted to get some thoughts on the value system. Like what would you say for imparting those values?
Yeah, values are so important. And, I've said, hundreds of times to both of my kids that, you know, I have never, I don't ask about their school performance or their performance in other things. I will always ask about what they're excited about learning. And that's, if they're excited about learning something, they should work on it. If they're not excited about learning something, they still should work on it, because in case they do get excited. So I do tell them that they might not know. So part of being, when they are acting lazy or disrespectful, or they don't want to go to class, or they don't do their homework, that's not good, right? They need to be respectful. So I'm trying to teach them that they sometimes at first they're not curious, but that's because you have to know enough. You have to know a certain criterion of information before you can reach that level of curiosity and motivation. So I fake them all out. I don't care, I'll lie to them. I'll say, it might be right there, the curiosity level. It's right there. It's at a plateau right now, but it's right there. You are just at this point, it might go up. And of course, it might not go up their entire lives, but they know that, this could always change what they're interested in. And that means if there's a teacher who's teaching them something, telling them to do their homework, they have to be on time. When they get to college, teaching my class today, there was like half the students there. And of course, half of them are on Zoom, and they're all saying they're sick, but they're not all sick. They're lying. They just want to be lazy. So there are all these different issues, obviously, but, like honesty. But, I think that's really important to ask your kids, what are you interested in right now? It doesn't mean that's what they should do in their career. And so often we do that as parents. It's like they paint one pretty picture. It's like, ooh, maybe they should be an artist. That's really putting on the imposter mask, because we're complimenting perfection. That's really, I think, dangerous and harmful to their, honesty and feeling like they can be honest. And so I think it's very important to, instead of saying, oh, that's a great picture, asking questions about, ooh, you use that color. Tell me why you use that color. Do you like that color? So having these conversations, which is behind the imposter mask, right? That process. And so when kids learn to look at the processes, that's where the curiosities grow, because that's where the honesty grows. And then they don't have to hide, all the kids who are saying, oh my gosh, I didn't study at all. And of course they study. They're hiding their efforts, in case they don't do well. And then of course, when they do well in a test, everyone thinks they're a genius because they hid their efforts. And then the imposterism that starts snowballing throughout their whole lives, where they have to show they were born this way, or it was really quite easier for them than people think, but they're nervous about being found out. So the imposterism starts to grow as you become more successful, because you feel like a fraud. So I think it's more about looking at the process. What were you interested in? Tell me why you did that. Those are the suggestions that I have for your question.
Kate, do you have any thoughts on that? I know it goes both ways too. Sometimes it's, hiding efforts. Sometimes it's exaggerating efforts. We see it on both ends.
So on the original question of values and values coming across to the kids, that actually was sort of part of what my research was on. What I thought was really interesting, because it kind of gets at Lisa's metacognition thing as well. It turns out there are basically two approaches by parents. Parents who try to download their exact value system to their children, kind of just as an entire document. And then people who try to help their kids learn how to design their value system. You're probably, we're all very biased, as everyone has said, and you're probably not going to come out with a kid who has an entirely different value system. But it helps to sort of be reasonable and say, this is my hierarchy. This is the value that I would put on top. These are the things that kind of come second. So we have a lot of conversations here about, what about if these two values are in conflict? Which one would you pick? What's more important to you as an attribute? So for me, at least, it's much more important that my children be aware that they have a value system. Well, I guess first that they have a value system. And then secondly, that they're aware of it and they interact with it and they think about it and say, this actually happens to be much more important to me than these other sort of values. And, the sort of an open discussion, because I think the odds of all 4 children ending up with the same hierarchy that I have are very small. But it's something that's very important to me that they think about, because, obviously as a tutor, people ask me fairly frequently about cheating, whether it's a good idea just in these scenarios, maybe to cheat a little bit, whether it's important if it actually gets And then I sort of have a quick conversation with them too, this is sort of an intersection between values and academic success. Obviously, like, cheating really isn't going to get you very far except in this one area, and then it's actually going to leave you behind because you haven't demonstrated anything. Obviously, I don't encourage them to cheat, but it kind of comes up in that area too. And I feel like if people are very clear with their value system and it's a lens that they use to really see the way they interact with the world, then it's much easier to have all of the other conversations because the values are already out there and they're in play.
It's very important to verbalize your values to your children so they know what's expected of them. Definitely.
Sonali?
Well, I was also going to add is that some kids need to understand what different values are, like right, with examples of them. So we need to give them the word of what compassion means, or accepting one's differences, or whatever those things might mean to us. I think we not only have to share that vocabulary and give examples, but also practice it together, right? Whether it's like doing a donation sort of thing together, supporting our community, or neighbors because a family member there is ill, whatever it might be. I think we can practice that and show them what this is doing for us, how it feels for us, and what it does for someone else as we practice these values. So I think that's important. I would say that a little bit about emotional awareness too. So kids don't always have the vocabulary to express themselves, nor do parents. We weren't taught that, many of us. So we want to make sure we give them the words as they are in younger ages and going forward to express themselves, where people can understand and relate to them.
Yeah, one of the things that I don't know yet because my kids are not in high school. One of the things that many parents say to me because I'm in the dark, and although of course I'm biased that I think I'll still be the same me. It's a cultural thing, and what Santosh, you were putting in the chat about this kind of you have to have these conversations about school and what happens in the culture of school, the school environment too. Like I'll say things like, no, my kids are not, into this academic competition, and they're not pressured about that. And every single parent, 100% has said to me, your kids aren't in high school yet. Wait till they get to Melbourne High School. And I deep within my heart, I don't think we will change. I will always ask my kids, what are you learning? And tell me about it. What's interesting about it? And we will still be reading together. We will still be having discussions together. I will never ask, what is your rank? What did you get on a grade? And what was the mean? I would never ask that. And, of course, parents are telling me 100% you will. I still don't believe it, but I have this kind of like anxiety of, gosh, am I just totally just oblivious to the reality of what's going to happen? But I think if we all just, together, as is the environment of the town in which we live, right? If we say to our kids, yeah, what are the classes that are your favorite and why? Who are the teachers that are great, and how do they teach you? And What kinds of discussions have you had? And I think these are all things that are so healthy for our children mentally. And hopefully just a tiny shift even where children are, maybe they're not stressed because of their parents, but they're getting stressed because of their peers in school. If that just goes away a little bit, I think it would be so much healthier for a kid. That's what I believe. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I believe. And we'll try to stick with it as long as possible. I don't know, those of you, so Kate, you have high schoolers, you said? Oh, no, you don't.
No.
Who was it that had high schoolers?
Uh,
Nobody.
I do.
Oh, Heather.
So, I mean, it's very easy to get caught up, and we're all in our own little information bubbles, and it is hard to not hear the noise and to then become anxious by it, or to get caught up in it and start to, feel that churn. So, awareness of it is good. And these programs like this are very good because you see there are so many resources out there. There's parents out there struggling with the same issues. And we all want our kids to both succeed, but also to be well-rounded, good people that we can send out as successful adults into the world. And I think that's where, we need to constantly be reminding ourselves that that's our job as parents, and to talk to them. And I know, unfortunately, Kohav is having some technical difficulties and he had to drop off, but it's good to keep them in the conversation and have them engaged in this dialogue regularly, and to let them have those failures and not react in big ways to them when that is part of how they're learning. So
Some of the best learning lessons are through failures.
yeah, absolutely.
Learn a
And the
lot.
older they get, the more important that is, because you're getting closer and closer to them having to make these big decisions that do have consequences and stuff. But like one of our panelists said, I can't remember which one of you said it, but life is full of detours, and preparing them for those detours is an important job that we can all undertake. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is a great turnout. I hope everybody can watch the film, talk about it with your friends. You can share the link for the next 48 hours with your friends and social circles, and let them take a look at it too. And if anyone else wants to stick around and ask any questions, we can keep this open for a few minutes, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and thank you all for such a great event. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you so much for organizing this. And
Yes,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Heather.
It's an important topic.
yeah.
Great job, panelists.
Yay.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah. I thought, yeah,
it's
I think
hard.
it's important. It's
It's
very
hard.
hard. Yeah.
It is. It's easier to talk in ideals and have these lofty expectations of ourselves, even as parents. And it's
yeah.
just, we are all just doing the best we can.
I know.
And we're not going to be perfect anywhere close to 100% of our time.
Yeah,
So-
and you have your kids, and you have these expectations of what they'll do and the decisions they'll make, and then you find out that they have their own ideas.
Yeah.
It
Really?
gets
You have
hard.
a brain?
Right.
Yeah, you're
Who
a
would have
person.
thought?
Yeah. One of the things I've always said to my kids, even as I was dropping them off to daycare, besides the I love you, I would always say, I trust you. And that has been so helpful, because now they have to live up to being
Yeah.
trustworthy people.
Yeah.
But they also know that I trust them and they trust me. So if they can come to me for advice, so I think it's so important, not only the kind of unconditional love, but the I trust you even when you're making mistakes or
And
doing
maybe even when you don't really trust them.
yeah. Let them
100%.
Heather.
let them make mistakes, the safe mistakes though.
Yeah.
Not the
Right.
big ones. Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing when you have to step in, that's another
Yeah.
important piece.
Hard one.
So, all right.
Well, good night,
Well,
everybody.
thank you all. I'm going to shut off the Zoom. It was good seeing everybody.
Thank
you.
you.
Soon.
Nice chatting with everyone.
Nice
Same
chatting
here.
with you
Bye.
all
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
Nice to meet everyone. Bye.